Well, good morning, fam. This is another episode of Unpublic with Citizen Stewart. It is a great day and glad to have you all here. We're going to chop it up a little bit with some things that are a little bit more spicy and a little bit more hot in education politics than what we normally talk about. But let me set it up and frame it this way. Education is an international global human right. It is personal to each individual. It is your intellectual development. It's what makes you a person. So anything that affects how you get educated, where you get educated, what is used to educate you has a very powerful and lasting effect on how free you are going to be in the future. So it's no surprise then that there's so much acrimony about the who, what, when, where, and how of education, because he who educates the children determines the future. So right now we're having this kind of war. Neil McCluskey has an article that he just wrote yesterday, and I want to talk about it more on another show, but it's the title is How to Bring Some Peace to the Woke Ed Wars. And by woke ed wars, I just want to frame this as we're having a real argument nationally about what we should teach about race and class and what's considered woke or over woke, what's considered to be, whether or not we should teach the Constitution in the frame of it was written by slave owners, and became the document that instituted white supremacy by deciding who could vote, where they could vote, what they could have, if they could own anything. When you write a document that says straight up specifically, all men are created equal except for them, you can imagine that there's going to be long-lasting problems. I'm all over the map on this issue, but I have somebody today who's a guest that could help us think through some of this, and also I think I said spicy was the word that I started this with, but my guest today is not afraid to chop it up when it comes to these issues. My guest is Dr. Kimya Dennis, who's a sociologist, a criminologist, a criminal justice activist, an activist just in general, someone who also has consulted with school systems and has, I think, an interesting take on the whole equity, inclusion, diversity market. I don't know if I should call it a market, but it seems like Dr. Dennis is someone who believes that there is a need for it, and also believes that many who are doing it are counterfeit, not doing it the right way. So, Dr. Dennis, welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. And I am first and foremost an activist. So all the other stuff is on the side. I'm an activist, educator. And that's important to highlight, because the way this is designed for centuries, it ignores thousands of years of African activist scholarship. And so you got a whole bunch of African Black folk running around thinking that you got to hide the activism part and comply with the supremacy to convey yourself as a scholar. And we got to dismantle that as well.
Well, it feels like that's part of the whole PhD system, is the compliance. Yeah, to becoming a good player.
Yes. 75% of staff and faculty across the nation, Western Hemisphere, being Canada and parts of the world, but 75% in the United States of America are white. And so that's the design of academia. So whenever people say academia is liberal, inclusive, they are falling for the okie doke. They've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray to not distinguish tokenism and selling out from the real change makers and the decision makers who are not afraid to lose their jobs to make real changes. This as a former faculty member.
As an aside, I actually read something 2 days ago that just kind of knocked me in the head. It was that the number of PhD faculty that actually are themselves children of PhD parents is like astronomical. Like it's basically like an elite within the elite. Like weird. but an
Well,
elite.
so let's clarify that. Elitism varies by race and ethnicity. So both my parents are PhD sociologists.
We'll
It is
see.
because of my parents being
Yeah.
activists, being Black activists, that my brothers and I learned facts and information beyond what the predominantly Black rich and public schools were teaching us K through 12. They forced us to come home and close these textbooks and watch Tony Brown's Journal, to watch BET News, which actually did have news back then.
I know.
To actually read. And so although we're an old school hip hop family, my parents are like, you gonna learn some real stuff and not go based on what's in those textbooks and libraries only. And so I want people to know, when we talk about Black folk with PhD parents, it's completely different when we're talking about white people. Because when white people, we're talking about a different form of wealth that is directly correlated with race and ethnicity for 5 centuries. Whereas Black folk with PhDs were more likely to remain living paycheck to paycheck. And Black faculty who got PhDs in the 1960s, 1970s did not come into it making a lot of money. And so passing down education from generation to generation among Africans does not mean passing down wealth necessarily. And having a PhD does not stop white people from calling me nigger. I've been called Dr. Nigger and all sorts of stuff. So I want people to, when they read that research, realize there's no such thing as racial neutrality. Those findings need to be understood within the context of race as well.
And I think it feels like oftentimes that's not the case. When I read a lot of the output of the PhD class, I know it's not written for me. I know it's not written for us. I know it's written for peers. Like it's, the whole publish or perish thing. My colleague, Dr. Cole, has made it explicit in his doctorate and in his way of doing work that it's always going to be plain for the community. So whatever he writes, he's attempting to make it plain for the community. But he's had a fight with academia to be able to even do that and still have it be considered scholarly.
Oh, well, I didn't fight with academia. I mean, I achieved tenured associate professor. I created an academic program. And for me, it was always being true to my purpose. My purpose is community. Purpose is using everyday language. So when I created an academic program and I taught courses, I told my students, you are accustomed to an American school system that only cares that you know how to memorize and regurgitate. Don't come to my classes copying and pasting, regurgitating, memorizing.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just nothing impressive about just repeating. And these are textbooks. Most publishers are white. Textbooks are mostly white. Even when they're talking about African-American studies, it's mostly white books that are used, considered these scholarly books. And so my purpose is to dismantle all of that, because complying with that means that you're complying. So you can't say I disagree with it, but there's no but. If you disagree with it, stop doing it.
Well, and you're giving up your mind when you do that. That's your most precious weapon in the world, is your mind. So if you're just saying, here, have my mind, take my brain. And if, as parents, if we're doing that at an early age, saying, here's my kid's brain, take it and, do what you will with it. That's just wrong. I will get there in a second around this kind of like your challenge to white history, white mathematics, and white science. And this quote that I saw in a dust up that you had with the school district. And really, your dust up with that school district had people running like for the doors of like, she wants to burn books. She wants to get rid of the classics, and all that stuff.
Don't say people, white people. We always got to clarify.
White people.
Don't ever use.
There may have been a few Negropeans in there too.
Nah,
as I look
I doubt it. I doubt it. But even if they were, those are token sellouts. The focus is still white people, right? Because when you're a token, you're doing that for white people. So I always want us to be specific. The people who have been sending thousands of emails, voicemails, text messages, calling me nigger, calling me a cunt, even as recent as this week, leaving voicemails on my business. Those are white people. Okay, so even if they have some tokens with them, that's still white people as the lead on that.
So you're still getting that type of hate. You're still getting backlash.
White people.
Yeah.
Don't
Okay.
ever stop. We're talking about 5 to 29 years. And these
Yeah.
are white people who know they can do this anonymously. So these are police
Hmm.
officers, medical doctors, politicians, school teachers, the white people who every other day walk around being considered be kind. But
Hmm.
when they are able to be anonymous, that's when white people do what they do. And we're talking about centuries. So that's why the work I do, I tell people this is not about comfort. This is not about politeness. This is not about bias trainings. This is not about looking at dictionary definition of racism and you thinking that white people can now call you racist. It's not about any of that. This is about me holding all white people accountable because every white person will pretend that they do not have a burner account on Twitter. But we're talking about billions of white people around the world, including white people in Germany who they report me to Twitter, all that stuff. So every white person cannot be the exception.
Mm.
And this is the case we're talking about any kind of power disparities for any demographic identity. Every power majority wants to claim it's someone else doing it. And I encourage underserved people to stop playing that game. Because the moment you grant one exception, there's another exception. There's another exception. Then you got a room full of billions of people who say, I don't know who's doing this. Okay,
Yeah.
y'all don't play that game anymore.
You know, I've said it multiple times with Twitter because I'm on Twitter a lot. I'm also somewhat of a magnet for the people with burner accounts, and I've busted a few where they will log into their regular account and then 10 minutes later their other account, and then there are ways for you to find trails between the two and then call it out and be like, oh, okay, see, I see what you got going on here. You say all your most racist, nasty stuff that that you can't say because you don't have the courage to say it when you're using your main account. You have your separate account to do it. And I've said, sent some to Twitter before saying, you could clean up Twitter tomorrow by outlawing anonymous accounts, like unmasking everybody and just saying, no, we're gonna have a real conversation and you're gonna have to say who you really are. Well, listen, I want to go to something that you wrote in October of last year that I think actually is interesting to me because I don't have a lot of insight on the diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't know if you would call it a market or a circuit or whatever it is. I do know that for many, it's become a hustle and a needed hustle. Like you only need DEI because there's a problem, but the people who coming to do it sometimes are not necessarily anything more than people who wrote a book and now they're there and they're collecting $1 million payments from some districts. You wrote, as I've explained for 10 years and called out while sitting in meaningless meetings or meaningless committees and meaningless trainings for organizations, most of the power majority are only checking things off like a to-do list. And when they have committees, offices, and trainings, this pertains to nearly all K-12 schools, college, universities, business, and organizations. This is the disparities and injustices. This is why disparities and injustices are in every aspect of school systems, law, police, court, penal systems, medical health systems, workforce employment system, and family community systems. In order for this to stop, we need to stop allowing inclusion, equity, and justice to be catchwords and money-making schemes. That's a pretty harsh, like straight up. You started that piece off with the fire. Tell me more about that. Like, what makes you write that?
I've been saying this for 10 years. So with the work that I do, I've tolerated a whole bunch of nonsense. I've tolerated people making money from unconscious implicit bias trainings, which are a complete waste of time because stolen and abused power, what you gonna tell people? I know what you're thinking. I'm gonna change your mind. Like that has no measurable outcome. And so I've said the same thing for 10 years. I started saying this before people started making tens of thousands of dollars in these trainings. That's why 365 diversity, one of my mottos, is not your typical diversity training because I'm results based. So when schools, businesses, organizations contact me, I tell them, I'm actually going to change some stuff. We're talking about policies, procedures. We're talking about doing annual assessments. We're not talking about me sitting there and saying, I'm going to pretend I know your bias pretend that bias is required to abuse people, because it's not. I'm not going to pretend that most of you want change, because most of them don't. And so a lot of places, when they contact me, they go someplace else and hire someplace else, even if that other person charges them $15,000 more. Why? Because that other person is well known, New York Times bestseller, anything of that nature. And well known means you could just put on your resume and say you did it. And the well known people are not coming back for follow up. They'll do a speaking engagement. They'll sit around and say, we've got to be kind, fight our bias. We're all in this together. But I always tell people, remember what happened in the New Jack City. Wesley, he was like, CMB, we got all that stuff, but he still shot him, right? So I always want people to remember that. You can scream about it and you can say, but remember where we all come from. We're in this together, CMB. And it still ends up horribly, okay? The problem is that people ignore warning signs. Adults are very much like children in that sense, right? Adults always say that children ignore warning signs, but adults do that as well, because people tend to not really want to cause trouble. They're afraid of losing their job, but they want to complain behind the scenes. So what I started doing years ago is I started telling folk, and this includes African Black folk, I'm not doing any more behind the scenes complaining with you. If I say something at a meeting, white folk mad at me, but you want to come take me to lunch to say, girl, thank you for what you said, but you're not stopping these white people from trying to terminate me from jobs and stalking me via phone. So I don't need no more behind the scenes appreciation. If you can't say it with your real name, real identity, put yourself at risk for reprimand from white people, if you can't do the change, if you can't be in these policy meetings and say, this policy sucks, we're going to do something else. If you can't do that, I really don't want to hear from you, because you're faking the funk. You know what I'm saying? Like Intelligent Hoodlum would say, you're faking the funk. You're doing a whole lot of dancing. You're doing the same thing that you're criticizing white people for doing. And you think that you can get away with it because you're indigenous, you're African Black, you're Asian, you're non-white Hispanic or non-white Latinx, Latin A, Latin O. You're being a token still. You're helping the white power that you claim that you want to dismantle. And that happens literally everywhere.
Is that the big problem that you see with that part too? Is that if you are that person, you're actually an assistant. You're not just neutral. You're not just saying, hey, I'm afraid of losing my job. You're actually an active worker for the other side when you do that.
Yes, you are an active worker ant. You are an active worker ant. So like when you see a big old hill of ants, where I always use ant hills for my crime classes for music. But when you see all those ants, right, you don't ever see those ants on the side like, I'm gonna just drink this lemonade, y'all do your thing, right? Like even the disinterested ants who are like, I'm feeling some type of way today, they doing it. And you can kill all them other ants, and those nonchalant ants are still going through the business, right? And so that's what most people do. They're taught that all their lives. So that's why those of us who are not like that, we're not only considered radical in terms of change making, we're considered extremist. And white people will swear up and down that we're threatening white people's lives because we're removing white dominance, centuries of white control. We're reducing medical racism, scientific racism, instead of celebrating a new article talking about COVID impacts Black people disproportionately, diabetes, all these other things. Instead of celebrating research and articles, we actually saying, I don't want to hear no more articles. I don't want to see no more officials from a hospital where we know that hospital is horrible at community patient advocacy, where we know that the medical students and the medical doctors and nurses throughout their careers are trained based on white people's science that was used for centuries for medical scientific racism. Adolf Hitler used the science of medicine created by white Americans for Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. So I'm not going to accept official statements. I'm not going to accept your special topics, race and health course. I'm not going to accept any of that stuff because you're not doing the in the grind work. So I'm not the good Negro. I'm not the happy Negro. Instead, I'm the person who's like, we as African Black people have been very challenging in activism for centuries in the Western Hemisphere, but we've also been told to take a step back and trust that change is going to happen. And what happens is a little bit of change drops down, and then they do that change so that we can get happy and have a cookout because we just so happy. Change is happening, girl. Get it. But you have to know that while you're doing that cookout, white people are like, okay, we got them. Let's go ahead and reverse that change. So that's the process.
So let me ask you about this, because what I've seen a lot of just in general, but mostly in education, is that there is a reality to being outspoken. And we have people at all levels. We have teachers, people who have started schools and are running schools, superintendents. We have people that are every day waking up with having to do the dual consciousness thing. On one side, in the back of their mind, they know that they are there to transgress and to get kids an education that they wouldn't normally get if there weren't enough of us in education, right? But at the other hand, just like it has always been in history, if you read famous educators going all the way back, dual consciousness is a strategy. It's not just a condition. It's not just it's not just a sickness in some ways. It's also a strategy that you need to understand that you have to raise money, that you have to be able to keep the lights on for the kids you're working for. You have to be there, as a matter of fact, too, because superintendents have lost their jobs and, just have gone missing. And all the work that they were trying to do to create structural change internally goes with them, right? So how do you, there are a group of people in the world who are fearless about what they're going to say, and they're willing to take whatever losses they have to take to make it happen. But as you encourage other people to be the same way, one of the main pieces of feedback that they give you is that I'm trying to build something, and it's just I have to somehow play the game. I have to actually know how to work in every room if I'm going to make stuff happen for kids.
Okay. All right. So first of all, fellow Black sociologist, criminologist, Dr. W.B. Du Bois, when he talks about double consciousness, he was not talking about being a token sellout. So I want African Black folks to comprehend what it means to have double consciousness. Okay. And I want African Black folks to stop pretending that existing in white spaces and trying to make changes requires you to be a token sellout. That's not what it requires. But if you convince yourself that it requires that, then that will be the outcome for you. If you believe that there's a such thing as racial equity while accommodating white people, then you do not understand racial equity. Okay. And it tends to only be when we're talking about racial equity and racial justice when people cannot comprehend this. I am a staunch LGBTQIA advocate, and especially Black and brown LGBTQIA people. And as a cisgender heterosexual woman, it is imperative that I am challenged to dismantle my own power, to dismantle the power of other cisgender heterosexuals, and to be 100% uncomfortable at all times doing so. Never, ever, ever will LGBTQIA people accommodate me and adjust to my timing, my tone, my texture, right? So people tend to grasp this when we're talking about various underserved, minoritized identities. It tends to only be when we're talking about racial and ethnic equity, and particularly for African people around the world, that suddenly people turn to a different tune, that suddenly the oppressors need to be the most comfortable people in the room. I have spent years doing this work, and I can be sitting in the corner being lynched from a tree, and all most of the people in the room care about, including most of the African Black people in the room care about, is whether there's a white person in the corner turning red and crying over something I said. So I want people to dissect what that means, that people are stuck in theoretical racial justice But all that really matters is how white people feel at any given moment. So whenever people talk about the school officials who are doing this work, I want them to stop exaggerating that, because 99% of school officials across the entire United States of America are not doing the work. First of all, most of them are white. So most schools, when they think about equity, they're talking about hiring a white woman instead of a white man. When schools hire Black and brown school officials and school decision makers, the caveat that these Black and brown folks ain't gonna ruffle too many feathers, okay? And when they think that they're not gonna ruffle too many feathers, they disguise it as change takes time. I want people to stop pretending change takes time is synonymous with not offending white people, okay? So we got some good people commenting here and said, Raymond said, not everyone can't get fired. If so, no one will be there to protect kids. Are you serious, Raymond? First of all, you all are giving white people all the power that white people want. If you really think that, what's the purpose of having employee unions, for example? Employee unions were created to give that power to employees, right? Labor unions, the whole idea is that they cannot fire everyone. So this scary Negro routine that y'all are doing is exactly why I do the work that I do. I do it unapologetically. I say the same thing no matter where you find me. White people, based on that Twitter thing about dismantling white history, white sciences, mathematics, white people still stalking me, thinking that they need to remind me about my words, but I always know my words. And I 100% stand by my words, okay? And Renee says unions don't protect Black people. Okay, so if you all really believe that, then let's talk about changing unions, okay? Black folks cannot be stuck in complaints and theories. If you want to change unions, let's talk about doing that. We actually have, I don't belong to a political party, so we have union-based Black parties that are being created across the nation that are struggling to get donations and volunteerism from Black people. So if you really want unions to represent Black people, donate your time and money to those Black unions that are developing. Donate your time and money to the Black political parties that are developing to challenge this two-party system. Because every time you respond that something can't happen, white people are applauding you. Because white people want you to believe that something cannot happen. We come from hundreds of thousands of years of knowledge, intelligence, education, sciences, arts around the world on the continent of Africa. And these white people have you on the Western Hemisphere thinking that you cannot accomplish anything, such that if you complain and challenge white people, all the Black people in the entire school system will be fired. Listen to yourselves, look into the mirror and ask yourselves, why are you teaching Black children to shoot for the stars? You too can be president, when you are a grown adult African Black person and you think that a school can fire all the African Black teachers.
Well, let me jump in on that one and just say this. I don't think that the fear is that they will fire all of the Black teachers. I think the fear is that the ones that are outspoken are the ones who will get fired. And over time, you will end up with nothing but compliant Black teachers in a system, because they have learned over time that there are consequences to being outspoken. And just like in any other system of oppression, when you learn where the punishments come from, you start to act accordingly to the punishments, not anything else. The reality of punishments is that the most outspoken, the most liberatory are going to be disappeared at some point. Right.
But the whole point,
that's the fear, but it will leave behind a whole bunch of other people who are like, see, I knew that was going to get you, or that was going to catch up with you,
Right. But the point is that schools are not going to fire a collective of outspoken Black people. That is a lawsuit waiting to happen. So white people punish me. They punish me individually. Why? Because most African Black people stand around as spectators watching white people punish me. And I keep telling these people, you all are being spectators to white people punishing me, but if we formed a collective, White people are not going to even punish 5 Black people at the same time. They're not going to fire 5 Black people at the same time and say that you were staging an insurrection based on race. That's just not going to happen. However, if you convince yourself that it will happen, then sure, convince yourself that it will happen. But, the work that I do, I don't mess with people who are stuck in conceptual, theoretical realities. I don't stay stuck with people who are, like, what if this happened? White people want you to be stuck in that because that really fits in their narrative that is designed to not only convince you that you don't know anything, but convince you that if you impose your knowledge in these spaces, that you will be punished. So I want you all to think about what that means when we have school systems, libraries, textbooks, book publishers, all of this. We have grown adults, even with terminal degrees, who are teaching children, and they believe that white people either invented the things that are worth knowing around the world or are the main advancers of knowledge and things that are worth knowing. Entire mathematics, histories, sciences, arts, theater, music. You have grown adult Black people, including who are teachers, principals, school officials. If you ask them to explain African sciences, Asian sciences, they don't know what to say, but they can recite that daggone textbook. And then when I say, well, let's get rid of those textbooks, they feel some type of way because it's inconvenient and it requires them to ruffle feathers when they've already done the whole step and fetch it routine. But I want to remind Black folks, Step and Fetch It was an actor. Okay, there's books about Step and Fetch It. He did that to make money from white people. That was not his real personality. So you have to admit, are you being Step and Fetch It to make money? And if so, you cannot be trusted either.
All right. Well, let me say this, because this is where this is really an interesting topic to me. So I've been an activist for years. I've been a parent activist with specific to schools because a long time ago, as a parent myself, I figured out this is somewhat of a game. And this is not just a game, it's a hustle. And it's a lot of things that people who are nostalgic about schools, they don't talk about the realities. So I discovered that years ago. At some point, I ran for school board as an activist, mostly because I wanted a platform to be able to just tell it like it is, not because I wanted to win. But I won. So now I'm on a school board as the person who thought I was just going to run to tell it like it is, but then I got a seat, right? So now I'm on the school board as an activist school board member. And for 4 years, I was always in trouble. I was always like the activist school board member. I dealt with every kind of troll attack and open face attack. And Chris, if you just said things more how people could hear them, you'd be way more effective. And I'd be more effective than what? You? Like more effective than you, that you've been like managing our poverty for years. And you're effective? No, you're not. It's more effective for me when the community knows what really goes down in these schools. So I committed to activism at that point. But by committing to activism, I also committed to losing jobs. So in the time, I think it was 3 jobs in my term on the board, 3 jobs, because people were calling my companies that I worked for, calling the presidents, threatening boycotts and all this stuff. And then I'd walk in on a normal weekday and there would be my check waiting for me. Like, well, it's been nice, having you here, but we're gonna have to let you go type of thing. So I understood the consequences, which only made me more emboldened to constantly be speaking my truth and build a life on that. So first of all, I decided not to run again because I felt like I could be way more effective and damaging to the system as a citizen than as somebody sitting on the board trying to do all the board decorum protocol stuff, right? So now you've lost me as a board member, though, and a lot of people wanted me to run again and wanted me to stay and fight that out. And I was like, no, I'm more effective as a citizen than I will be in the confines of this stuff. And they saw that as a loss because now the board has no truth teller anymore. And then after that, I just like made a commitment that that's who I was going to be, even if other people couldn't do it. I understood that not everybody could, take the losses that I was taking. But here's the point where I'm driving home with that. So you had a situation where you were a trainer to a district, a school district, and you told them a little too much of the truth. And what happens in school districts, people don't know what's behind the news story oftentimes. The news story shows up, it's like outrage farming, people gang up and they like, oh my God, can you believe this is happening in our schools? And it, then it's on the news, it's in the paper. The reporters are half stupid themselves. They don't even understand what they're writing half the time. They're not committed to writing the real story about the who's who, what actors are coming from where and all of that. But then, school districts cut contracts, they cut ties, and then they go for the safe person after that. And that's what I noticed in the story that you sent me, with the incident that you had with the school district where you were training them. They cut ties because of maybe you got a little too real with them. But now that district doesn't have you as a voice internally doing some structural work. And so the structures are going to remain the same, maybe even get worse, because now they might bring in after you somebody to cleanse the palate, which will be some milquetoast person. Are you sympathetic at all to the argument that when people look at you and they look at me or whatnot, they think, but there's still a need for you all on the insides of these systems where you're not going to be after you've told the truth?
And we already know there's a need for us. We don't need motivational speakers to tell us that. I can't stand motivational speakers. Don't tell me there's a need for me. There's been a need for us for centuries. So we don't need that motivation to do what we do. Unless people can change the outcome and potentially risk themselves or use their power to change the outcome, we don't need them to give us a sermon about keep hope alive. We don't need that. So I would say that the Triad City Beat article that was written about me January 2020, I think they did the best in terms of journalism that shared the truth of what I said, but also challenged white people to be like, is what she said false though? Another thing is a lot of people, they'll talk about intersectionality in terms of Kimberly Crenshaw's theory, but intersectionality in terms of interlocking, intersecting oppressions has been a concept that sociologists and Black sociologists in particular, and Indigenous sociologists have researched for centuries. So if I'm doing a training about gender equity in schools, yes, I'm going to bring up race and ethnicity. Why? Because race and ethnicity interlocks with gender identity. How people express and gender non-identity varies by cultures, languages, race, religions, and everything. So I explain that when I do the trainings. So one thing that always gets me with angry white people is they're like, you were doing a gender training. This ain't had nothing to do with race. Why'd you tweet about race? First of all, I don't allow white people to tell me what topics pertain. I don't allow, first of all, most people don't really read. They don't read centuries of knowledge, let alone thousands of years of knowledge. So when they contact you to tell you what a topic really is, it's 100% based on them thinking that they are in control of your mind and your voice, and they are not. So I have no disrespect for the school decision makers in what happened in a year ago in terms of I truly appreciate them. I respect them. My tweet was not in an attempt to ruin the existence of that school district. It was more so giving a shout out to some things. But also we have to remember that some things are social experiments. And this pertains to anything. Whenever an organization, and this can be a school or any type of organization, claims to be excited about wanting to make changes, you have to test who are the real decision makers. Because oftentimes people will tell you that the decision makers are the people who want equity and justice, but you find that the decision makers are really you can call it conservatives, you can call it the people who don't want any changes. Those tend to be the real decision makers. And you don't know that though until tragedy strikes, because people are really good at saving face. They're really good at pretending, yeah, we're gonna make some things. And it's very common when people contact me to hire me to do this work after the first session in particular. And sometimes it can be very religious people of various races, including Africans and Black people. But after that first session, when I'm not sitting around hugging them, talking about, hey, do you know what racism is? Do you know? Because I don't do that. So after that first session is when they're like, damn, this is for real, like for real. And that's when sometimes they'll change their mind after the first session. So that's why I always tell people, I do this work on social media and in communities, because for me, this is the intro. Right? This is an introduction. So by the time you for real get to me and tell me we want to make some changes, I'm not giving you an intro explanation of what is racism. We're not going to recite the white people's dictionary. We're not going to do all that stuff. I'm not going to keep defining patriarchy and sexism and homophobia to you, because I do this work every day so that by the time these grown folks get to me, they don't need me to explain definitions. They don't need me to give them an intro level. You grown and you need an intro level like this is elementary school. And for me, I tell people, you all are doing that intentionally. The power majority will waste your entire life repeating definitions, repeating meanings, giving them anecdotes, giving them role plays to explain. That's intentionally done by power majority because they want to waste 15 years of your life. And in the 16th year, when you're like, okay, I done spent 15 years, give you a definition of white supremacy. Y'all ready to do this? In the 16th year, they're like, we ran out of funding. That's intentional design. So when people get to me, they'll notice, they're like, Dad, she's rough. You know, we can't handle that. She don't, well, they love to say she hates white people because white people are accustomed to, particularly African Black people, hugging and saying, I know you don't mean any harm, but let me explain the history of this nation to you. Like white people control publishers. White people know the real history of the nation. That's how they're able to delete stuff and only put certain things in history books, right? They know the facts. So I keep telling people, when people are mad at me, it's 100% because I present things in a way that particularly African Black women are told we're not supposed to. Whereas people will hire white people and allow white people to scream at them about injustice, right? And the white people will be considered, it's uncomfortable, but at least it's information we need.
Yeah, I don't know, like what you see in a lot of places where you go, but this is where I saw more than once. And I've seen it actually in more than one place, which is you don't always know where the real power in a school district is and where it lies. There are invisible powers that kill things in the middle of the night. They kill contracts, they kill policies, things get changed. And even as a board member, it was really interesting to me at times to think, like, even with the superintendent, oh, you don't really have all the power that people think you have, right? Because there are hidden powers. It shows itself pertaining to this conversation. It shows itself in times of like we had an equity rollout. There were schools that were asked to do these inventories. Each teacher asked to do these like inventories. There's a tool. I'm not going to be smart enough to know what it is or say what it is or whatever. You know, I don't remember the name of it, but it's like some sort of typical inventory that people take. Is nothing fancy. There's nothing special about it. And all the teachers just revolted, straight up said, no, we're not doing this. You're calling us racist, right?
Exactly.
And now you have a principal who's like, but I thought I was in control. I thought I said what y'all get to do. Union gets involved. Teachers just flat out say, hell no, you calling us racist. We're not going to do it. There is no authority to say, no, you're going to do it. The law gets involved. It gets funky. And what you see in that situation is, okay, number one, I know where the real power is. Number two is they're just resistant to change. That's so all the like training in the world, all the like, you know, so we had two people that were attempting to push two different ways, lost their contracts with the district. One was $1 million contract, trying to have people have courageous conversations and stuff like that. And people are like, yeah, we are courageous. We don't want to have that conversation. That's how courageous we are. We're so courageous. We don't want to have that conversation.
That's right.
So then it just felt regressive after that. Like the aftermath of that. Yeah, it just felt like, oh, not only did you not want to do this, now you're emboldened to completely go the other direction and be like, I'm a good person. I don't know what to tell you. I'm a good person. You can't call me racist. I love my kids. I love my classroom. I love my job. And you're not going to make me do this. So no impact, really. No real change after multiple people coming in trying to help.
Yep. And that's 100% intentional. Tell people, stop pretending that stuff happens by coincidence, accidentally, misunderstanding, miscommunication. Don't tell me that Raymond says union is dangerous. Okay. Don't tell me that if I had said something different, then white people would have smiled and said, yay, we'll dismantle white supremacy. That's not how power works, right? So I created an academic program and I operated that program for 9 years. I was in charge of doing the annual assessments for accreditation for the program. I was in charge of hiring and evaluating faculty for courses. I created and taught courses. I impacted the library material. I was part of the library's assessments of the materials. So I know from the inside. I also was a chair of a curriculum committee at the college. So I know how curriculum development happens, curriculum change happens, library assessments happen. Whenever people act like this stuff is impossible, I tell people it's possible to change. It just takes forever. It's not something that you do and it just quickly happens. I mean, this stuff is centuries, right? But it'll never start if you all keep talking about how exhausted you are just thinking about doing it and you're afraid of offending some people. Like, libraries do assessments. That's what they do. They don't keep all these books and journal articles in there for eternity. They actually do assessments to say what is some stuff we need to get rid of. So when I say I want to get rid of the white focus of history, sciences, mathematics, arts, literature, and I'm talking about removing these textbooks and stuff that are misrepresenting facts and conveying to children and grown adults that white people either invented everything or are the main inventors and main developers of everything. I don't believe in just taking out these textbooks and saying, let's donate them. No, because these textbooks are garbage, right? So instead, we actually have people, because when I said burn in that tweet, I was meaning figurative, like white people complaining, talking about you're Hitler. I'm like, white people really want to pretend to be oppressed. You're pretending to be oppressed because we're removing you from controlling us, which is the reverse psychology that unfortunately too many African Black people fall for. But so when I say remove it, I was speaking figurative. Because burning stuff was not the point conveyed, but it did get white people's attention. There are people who will tell you that there's a way to recycle this outdated work, and not recycle in terms of throwing it in a bin and it ends up in a big hill in Jamaica. We're talking about turning it into clothes, turning it into something useful that can be donated to people. So
whenever a question about this burning book thing, because you did touch a nerve with that, and I think the burning book thing actually is like just in general for everyone from Jewish folks to Black folks and others, just the burning protest things or whatnot is an imagery that scares people in general. But do you have a problem with every group of people just deciding how their particular kids are going to learn history or whatnot? So, for instance, if white people want to teach their kids an idealized or stylized version of their history and they want to have schools for that, then so be it. And if Black folks want to have a Black lens on and an African lens on how they teach their kids their heritage, their culture, their place in the world history, math, science, so be it, and so on, right? Like, are you okay with there being a plurality of the ways that schools you're not?
No, because everything's already controlled by white people. So what's the point of letting white people say, we're going to have our own space then? I mean, because even when there was legal segregation, Black schools were using white people's books. And Indigenous people were using white people's books. So that doesn't work. I always tell grown folk to stop repeating what already does not work, because you're wasting taxpayer money as well. And I don't believe Black folks should be paying taxes anyway, because reparations. But I just think that it's the same nonsense over and over again. And as for the whole figurative book burning thing, it was white people offended by that. They want to use Nazi Germany as an excuse. They want to pretend that it's taking knowledge away. But my point is that it's not knowledge in the first place. So that's the point. It's not factual information. It needs to be gotten rid of. So if people cannot handle the book burning comparison, it's not Black folk who are mostly uncomfortable with that comparison. But if people are uncomfortable with that comparison, then good. Take some time to let it marinate and make some changes.
Yeah.
I don't waste time.
I have to say, for the record, I disagree on this one thing. I believe that education is inherently a local matter, and I don't mean geographically local. I mean personally local. So if the Indians in northern Mexico want to overthrow the Mexican government schools and create Indian schools, native indigenous schools in northern Mexico that now are taught through their language and through their understanding of the world and their legacies and their histories, I'm all for it. If the Maori people of New Zealand want to do the same thing because they've existed within the colonial schools for years and they want to do that, I'm for that too. If Black Americans want to do that, if Chicano Americans want to do that.
That's not what you asked me though.
Is it so?
You said,
no, I'm just saying, but
if white people
want to do it too, I want them to have that right too.
And, no, that's not comparable. White people doing that is not comparable.
Here's one reason why I'm for it. And it's going to sound like a real non-academic reason.
It's not about academia. This is about...
Yeah, but I mean, when I say academic, it's not going to sound like a pedagogical reason or anything you're doing with. It's more like a sociological one for me, which is I feel better when those people collect and I know where they are. So we're right now mixing kids together and making kids learn a common curriculum, a common thing, and we're pretending that somehow is like natural for us all to be in the same place. I, in some ways, feel like some kids need a different education than I want for my kids. Like you need something different for your kids. Let's stop putting us all in the same place, trying to do a common curriculum, because the more you do that, the more I lose. Right. So why don't you take your curriculum and go do your thing and don't make me have to fight about it all the time.
So I hear you, but here's the thing. I'm a sociologist and a criminologist. So the sociological approach is to say white people already stole enough. They do not need their own schools that convey falsehoods. Because white people, even if white people wanted their own schools, they would not stop there. That's 529 years of facts, right? And we also have to be honest as well. Publishers are mostly white people making billions of dollars. Publishing companies that pass these books to libraries and bookstores is mostly white people. So if you told white people they can create their own schools, first of all, they're more than 60% of the US population, which includes white Hispanics and people who racially identify as white, but are also indigenous. So if you tell white people they can have their own schools, there'll be way more white schools than anyone else. And guess what will happen? These white schools will be the only schools with successful accredited programs and graduate programs. And so it's the same thing over and over again, because we already have indigenous schools. We already have African Black schools. So telling white people they can keep doing what they're doing, just keep it in their corner. A lot of white people will say, well, duh, we wanted to, they're like, well, we told y'all during Jim Crow and segregation to stop coming to our communities. Who's going to lynch you? So, yes,
well, let me ask you the opposite question. The opposite question would be like, do you believe in African-centered schools and indigenous-centered schools? Okay.
Yeah, that's not comparable to white people, though. Like, I always want people to understand when we talk about indigenous schools, African schools, Asian schools, that's not anything comparable to saying white people can have their own schools. White people already have their own schools. It's not analogous, okay? I don't ever allow people to pretend that these are on the same level. The whole issue is white power. So you can't say white people can have their own schools the same way HBCUs exist. HBCUs exist because the form of teaching our own people, and some HBCUs were created by white people because, the whole white savior thing, right? So it's not comparable in the least. So saying indigenous people can have indigenous schools is not in the same sentence as white people having their own stuff because white power is 100% based on stolen and abused power, based on stealing thousands of years of knowledge, redesigning it, reshaping it, and pretending it was created by white people or mainly advanced by white people. So it's not comfortable.
All right. Well, here's where I want to land, because we're coming up on an hour here. Would just want you to kind of say what would be your parting words on us doing better to achieve for our kids schools that are not whitewashed, are not full of materials that are whitewashed and pedagogy that is whitewashed, but making it so that non-white folks, people who are not racialized as white, can have a humane education in the United States of America after hundreds of years of trying, or after 50 years of trying, or after decades of trying, or maybe even after 1 week of trying.
29 years.
Yeah. That we could finally achieve a humane and healthy education, culturally healthy, for our young people.
I just tell people, be honest. Don't pretend that you really want changes when you want just theoretical change. If you only want a hashtag, if you only want one textbook in one class, that's not really productive change. So that's just my final words. I mean, I've spoken on this for years, and white people have tried to punish me for speaking on this. And most African Black people have been silent, watching white people abuse me and terrorize me. So there's not but so much free labor as an African Black woman that I can provide. Either you want changes to happen or you don't. There's local organizations in many counties and cities across the nation, African Black folk, Indigenous, Aboriginal, Native, Alaskan Native, Asian diaspora, Hispanic, Latinx, Latina, Latino people who are actually starting organizations. They are competing for grant funding with these wealthy white organizations getting grants. So if you really want to do some stuff, do some stuff. But I always tell people, don't ask me what you should do, because you know how to find that new item you want to purchase. There's something new that you found on a commercial and you don't know where to find it. But what do? You know how to Google or internet search the hell out of stuff, don't you? Right? You know how to find some things, don't you? So one thing I do not allow grown folks to do is to claim ignorance when it allows them to excuse their laziness and their apathy. Find things when you want to find things. You talking about, getting rid of the police, which I support, removing 95% of police funds from every police department across the nation. When we demand that, we have plans of action and organizations we contact. So I just want people to stop using excuses for their complacency. And if you're scared of white people, just say that, but get out the way so that we can do this work. Don't mess up the work that we're doing.
All right. She's going into ludicrous lyrics now. Get out the way. Move.
The gold is still rocking, though.
Listen, everybody, if you want to be in touch with Dr. Dennis, this is the website to go to. It's 365 Diversity. I have it up on the screen so that you can find it, but it's 365diversity.com, and 365 are the numbers 365diversity.com. There are also articles that you can find on Medium. If you search Medium for 365 Diversity, you also find some of Dr. Dennis's articles there. The one that I referenced at the beginning of the show is one that was done on October 31st, 2020. It's called Stop Using DEI and DNI and Anti-Racism as a Money-Making Scheme. I thought that was an interesting one. Less interesting, the stories about like what went down with the school district cutting ties, as in Dr. Dennis as an equity trainer. Less interesting just to me because those things are theater, and they're public theater, and they don't change anything. And actually, they're fairly common. You talk to anybody who's trying to work with districts across the country, and once things start getting too true and too real, you know when it's getting too true or too real, because that's when the ties are cut. And what I hope is at least if you get your check on the way out, then it's fine. Ask me to walk, but ask me to walk with my
I did
feet.
not get a check. No. So the white people were complaining that there was taxpayer money going to someone who they considered as racist and hates white people, which there's no such thing as racism against white people. And so, no, I did not get a paycheck. And I'm absolutely fine with that because my work is my work regardless. And we have centuries of free labor for the work that we do. So not getting one paycheck.
Which is why I'm not trying to do any more free labor. We gave that free labor already.
Yeah. And so some people are like, well, you could have done this work without that tweet. We could do all sorts of stuff without saying anything.
Yeah.
So until people start stalking white people and stopping white people from doing what they do everywhere, literally everywhere, don't come at African Black people who express our work on social media or in any space. People spend, and this includes Black people, spend way more time chasing after us, trying to censor our words than they spend stopping white people. And I always tell people, when you tell me, Kimya, you shouldn't have said that, I ask them when the last time they told a white person that, and they get quiet because they don't tell white people what to do. Well, so don't tell me what to do.
They feel right now, and this could be an entirely different show, but right now, what I would say, if I'm doing like a careful analysis of sentiment that's being expressed on Twitter and through social media, the white narrative now is we're sick of your crap. We're sick of y'all. We're sick of claims that aren't true. We're sick of being told that we're bad people all the time when we're good people. We're sick of the whining. We're sick of the cancel culture, the wokeness. I'm trying to think of all of it, but if you were to put it in a nutshell, put it all in a blender, that's what it comes out as. Is we used to be sympathetic to this stuff and wanted to talk, but y'all shouted us down so much to now we're at the point where we don't even want to have the discussion. And because if we're as powerful as you say we are, we don't have to have the discussion. So there's a lot of that there, in the swagger, in the responses now. It's the Tommy Lahren and, kind of the other, so I told you, and now we're getting into they do have the bombs. So
I don't argue with white people. It's like, this is not about whether white people are loving and kind. This is, Black sociologists have studied this for centuries. White people can marry Africans, have, African children adopted, and still be white supremacists controlling everything. This is not about whether white people are kind, loving. Most nonprofits are created and led by white people. And guess what? They are donating around the world to parts that white people stole from the first place. And it's based on the white savior syndrome. It's not based on, we're dismantling white power. It's based on, we white people show up, ha, 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 you heathens, we're bestowing knowledge upon thee. That's what it's based on. So when white people act like they're being oppressed, misunderstood, on all that stuff, I just let white people go on and on and on, because I let white people know you're doing in 2021 the same thing white people have done for 529 years when we do not celebrate white smiles and white hugs. I'm not the least bit deterred by that response from white people, including when white people forget that their Zoom call is not on mute and they talk also. I'm like, go ahead and talk. I'm just sitting there listening to y'all, because go ahead and say what you got to say, white man. Because for me, it's just another social experiment to get people to realize I'm not changing you as an individual. I'm focusing on the larger picture. So your work can keep going.
So you're undeterred. You're undeterred by the blowback and by the things that honestly scare a lot of people about being outspoken, being fearless, being free speaking. The thing that most is feared is the punishments, the professional punishments.
White people have contacted everyone on my resume. They've contacted organizations, mental health organizations, suicide prevention organizations that I work with. When I was still a professor, they contacted that school, all sorts of stuff. White people have, including this week, have threatened to rape me, murder me, all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
Instead of people telling me to be scared, people need to focus on stopping the white people. Whenever people contact me, I say, you're free to donate your time and money to 365 Diversity, but don't you dare donate your kindness to me. I don't need your hug. You need to focus on dismantling white dominance. Focus on them white people, because hugging us all the time and comforting us is 100% distraction. It's like on the plantation during slavery. African Black women are being beaten down, right? Hanging from trees, being beaten by white people. And the other slaves come up and be like, sister, let me dust that sweat off your face. All of y'all enslaved Africans, and you dusting sweat off her face instead of whipping these white people. And that's exactly what happens when people come to me to thank me or to see if I'm okay. I don't need you to dust the sweat off my face while I'm being lynched. I need you all to focus on stopping white supremacy.
Wow.
Go over there.
Well, I will end there. I will say, if you should come back, we should keep the conversation going. I imagine there's several places where we disagree. And that
don't make me not right though. I'm joking.
I know, but we no, listen, I'm willing to chop it up whenever, because it only sharpens my ideas. It only sharpens me, especially with educated folks, to say it's a service to be able to sharpen your iron with other people. We would disagree on some things. One of the things, though, is that we don't disagree on is we have had a similar experience in that it is so many times in a week that I will get DMs that say, I'm so glad you said that, or I'm so glad you did that thing, or I can't believe that person is coming at you like this. I can't believe that they're filling your timeline with their ignorance and blah, blah, blah. And that's a weird experience, because I've been having that now for at least a decade, for at least 10 years, going back to when I was on the board. The kind DM people, the attaboy, keep saying the stuff that needs to be said, but it's in your DMs, and you're
yeah, that's what I say about January 6th. Like the outraged white people, the white liberals, white anarchists, white anti-fascists, they're not really saying too much, because the white people at the January 6th terrorism are their friends and family and coworkers.
And don't even get me started. They're getting organic food.
Yeah.
And, getting sent home to be with their mom in one case.
But these are white people's family and friends and coworkers. These are white 529 years of lovingly coexisting with white terrorism. So even when white people disagree, white people still go with the flow, because they will tell you, I don't want to lose my family. I don't want to lose my friends. I don't want to lose my job, blah, blah, blah. So they don't care what we're losing. It's 100% of what they're losing. So they will even see a white Klansman hanging you and lynching you and be like, but he's a good pastor. Like that's how this perpetuates, because there's always an exception. There's always I can't lose my job. So the work that I do, I tell people, you are free to disagree, but my life and my work and my purpose are not for everyone, nor will I ever pretend to be. I do not accommodate every opinion, because while I waste time trying to do that, the problems strengthen, because white people want us to be focused on debating. I don't waste time debating with folks. I'm focusing on the larger purpose, and people can disagree, but at the end of it, when the outcomes start shaping, they start to learn, okay, instead of disagreeing, we should have said, how can we interlock these different approaches? Black folk will waste too much time debating with each other instead of saying, okay, how can we interlock this and collaborate, instead of us trying to force each other to feel the same way about it.
All right. Well, listen to my guest today, to my fam, to the friends watching the show. There's your marching orders right there. Let's stop talking about the debates. Let's stop debating. Let's actually go straight for the power. And let's
talk about, be about it.
Yes, so yeah, don't talk about it, walk about it, is what I always like to say to folks. This has been an hour or more with Dr. Kimya Dennis, who leads 365 Diversity, among other things, criminologist, sociologist, activist, professor, librarian, consultant. Like, man,
no
you have been busy.
I left academia,
but you did it. So I'm just gonna put it there out there, like, right, like it's in the resume, it's there.
Okay.
So anyways, hopefully this for a lot of people challenges you these discussions, challenge your ideas. It's not about having a comfortable conversation every morning. So I love, this is unpublic. It's off the record. It's private to the people we are talking to. So thank you all for joining. I appreciate an hour of anybody's time.